My name is John Hanlon. This is a conversation with my grandmother, Marjorie Hanlon, recorded in February 2014 at her home in North Webster, Indiana, almost exactly 10 years before she passed away at the age of 91 in March of 2024. She was born in 1932 in Topeka, Kansas, to Lester and Elizabeth Blaylock. This video primarily focuses on her memories as a girl living in Kansas during World War II, but she also looks back on the years following the war and specifically the experience of her husband, Donald Hanlon, who was stationed in Germany during the Korean War. Our conversation begins and returns several times specifically to the topic of D-Day. That is because this interview was prompted by a college project I was writing on memories of D-Day. Now that she is no longer with us, I thought it would be appropriate to share our conversation with everyone and look back at a unique time period in history. Tell me what you remember from D-Day.
Okay, the only thing, I was about 11, 12 years old, somewhere. And the only thing I can really remember is that I heard this yelling out on the corner where I lived, and it was a paper boy selling newspapers because of the big news. And he ordinarily didn't do that kind of a thing. So I wondered what was going on. But of course it was exciting. I was in junior high school maybe at the time.
So when did you figure out what was going on?
I don't know. Of course we didn't have TV, and we had a big stand-up radio, and I suppose my mother turned on the radio, probably. But my dad was in the service at the time. He was drafted in 1944. And he was drafted because he only had one child. Even though he was 33 years old, he was drafted. And this is from Topeka, Kansas, where we lived. And he was sent to Farragut, Idaho for his basic. They put him in the Navy.
So what all did he do?
Okay, then from there they sent him to, I think he got to come home right after basic, and that was the only time we saw him then for 2 years, till he was discharged. He was sent to Seattle for schooling on the Union River, no, it's a lake, Union Lakes, I think it might be called. And then from there he was put on a boat, and I can't remember the name of the boat. I wish I could. Ship, I guess you call it. And but it was a submarine tender. I do know that. And they were in the Pacific for almost 2 years. But they ended up, after the war was over, they ended up in the occupation forces in Japan. And the base was called Sasebo, and it's still operating today. Cleared the bottom left of Japan on a map. And it's there because my neighbor down here's job is to go around and inspect American schools in overseas government bases, and he showed slides of this same place. He said it's the largest in the area, a naval base, big area of the world for USA. And he inspected the schools that the American kids go to school. And so I don't know exactly how long he was in, but you figure out after D-Day, and then till he got out February of 46. So that's how long he was there. And so he sent back a trunk, a big wooden trunk that got to our house before he did. and my mother and I were all excited, and we didn't know that we weren't supposed to open it, but we did. And he got a little upset when he got home and found out we'd opened his trunk. And the one reason he got upset was because I took the pea coat and wore it, because teenagers at that time, that was the big thing, was to wear pea coats for teenage girls. So he wasn't too happy about that. But one thing he brought back was this whole stack of Japanese money. There was a big stack of this. Here's the paper that was the blank. So, I mean, there was several packs of these in that trunk. So it must be a very small denomination. And my second daughter, just yesterday, who's almost 60, said they played with this stuff when they were little kids. But today I was going through the money, I found this one that I think is so unusual and never seen it before. And it's a Japanese, it says 1 shilling, and I didn't know they use shillings in Japan. But in big letters, it says the Japanese government. And that's all in English writing. So this must have been printed for when a bunch of English were over there, maybe when the soldiers were over there or something. Otherwise it wouldn't have English words. And it's big writing, because I can read it, and I got bad eyes. 1 shilling. It's got a tree that's got something like dates or something hanging from it, and on the other side it's palm trees with water. Oh, of course, it's missing a corner too of this bill, but I think that's for somebody that was over there would know more about that than I do. Okay, are we ready to talk about the rings?
Sure.
2 things that he brought back were 2 pearl rings, and actually a pearl necklace, which has gotten, we don't know what happened to it, actually. But we do know where the rings are. 2 of my daughters have the rings, and this one is a 2 pearl ring with nice, pretty gold band. And my 4th daughter just emailed me this picture. She's got the ring in Seattle, where she lives. And the story goes that this was made on board the ship by the dentist, and he used dental gold for the band. And to this day, the pearls are still attached, which is amazing, because this 60 years or 50 or whatever it is. Is it 50 or 60?
It's 70.
So whatever. And the other ring was a single pearl that my 5th daughter wore at her wedding. She wore this single pearl ring. He would swap cigarettes for merchandise, since he didn't smoke. And they were allowed so many cigarettes a week or something. After his 2 years, he was drafted for just 2 years, and he was back then in the spring of '46. And then the job that was waiting for him turned out that the company opened another office in Ohio, so that meant we had to pick up and move from Kansas to Ohio. And that was kind of a dramatic move for us, because we'd always lived in Kansas, Topeka. And I went from a large middle school to a school in Ohio that was 1 through 9, and there was only seven in my 9th grade class. It was 2 girls and 5 boys. That's what I went to, from a very large junior high. So it was kind of a shock. Plus riding school buses that I never had to do. I had to ride city buses in Topeka, or some father that hadn't been drafted, and there weren't too many of those around actually, might take us to school sometimes. But I rode a lot of city buses. And one time coming home, Alf Landon was on the bus because he lived out in the country. He got off my bus and walked the rest of the way to his house just outside of Topeka. Alf Landon, the guy that ran for president. And his daughter went to school with me, grade kindergarten through 6th in my school in Topeka, Kansas. Nancy, his daughter Nancy. So there were a lot of politicians, of course, being the state capital. A lot of politicians around there. And one of my memories was selling poppies, those poppies for the veterans. And my spot to sell was right in the corner at the Capitol building. That's where they would give you a spot to stand and sell. And I wish I could remember what our pay was. It was some percentage of what we got, I guess.
So when he returned, did you notice any? Did it affect him at all?
Him?
Yes.
Well, he wasn't in any battles, for one thing. And so there was, as far as I knew, there was no physical things any different or mental, because of this big change in this move was enough to, kind of mess you up from one state to another. That's what we had to deal with. And housing was so bad then, so scarce right after the war.
So how did the war affect you?
Okay. My memories in grade school were all the drives we had, and we saved rubber bands, made big balls of rubber bands because they wanted rubber, and we saved cigarette foil, aluminum foil, for the whatever they made, and newspapers. Oh, and then the big thing, the nice thing was that they had the system for the savings stamps and savings books, the savings bonds. 1875 or something, you paid for a savings bond, and in 7 years it was going to be worth $25. And you would bring your quarters in to the school every one day a week, whatever day it was, and you would get a stamp. And you put it in this book. And when you got $18.75 worth of quarters in there, stamps, then you turned it in for a savings bond. And that was exciting. I thought that was really big stuff. And I ended up with 7 bonds. And I kept them for a long time. And the funny part is that I was married and had some children, but my husband and I decided we wanted ice skates. Well, we spent the bonds for my ice skates, the ice skates. At least partly. It wouldn't have taken, 7 times 25 would pay for 2 pair of ice skates probably. And the dumb thing we did is went out one night on a lake that we weren't familiar with. We were the only ones on the lake. It was after dark, and we're out there skating. We don't know where the soft spots are. Nobody would have, they would have seen our car, but nobody would have known what happened to us, unless they figured out later we'd fallen in, if we'd have fallen in. That was a dumb thing to do. But not as dumb as when my husband took me out on Lake Erie with a car on the ice. That was really dumb. The whole family in it. I still have nightmares about that. Because nobody would have known what happened to us. Because nobody knew we were there. My big memory is the lack of some food items, especially sugar, because I'm a chocoholic, for one thing. And we would stand in lines if we heard somebody had a Hershey bar for sale. Of course, nylon hose and all that was really scarce. They'd stand in line, but I wasn't wearing nylon hose at that time. And I remember the food stamps. You were given food stamps for sugar, coffee, gasoline, meat, and you only had those were rationed foods, and that you only had so many. I don't know how often you were issued those stamps, but I would go. But when we finally got fudgesicles, so this must have been after the war when fudgesicles were made. We had a neighborhood grocery, and my mother would run up a bill and pay it, I don't know, once a month probably or whatever. So I would go and buy one fudgesicle, and at the time it was a dime, and they'd put it on this grocery by hand. Everything was by hand. Added onto our grocery bill, dime at a time. But my big story is when the ice cream man came during the war on his horse-drawn carriage, and said he didn't have any ice cream, just some kind of sherbet, because he couldn't get sugar. And I said, I really don't like sherbet. And he says, well, what kind of a patriotic citizen are you? He said. And I gave him a mouthful because I told him about my dad had been gone for 2 years and I hadn't seen him, and I'll never forget it because I'm not usually, at that time, wasn't that type of person to get too excited and to say much, but I thought he kind of ticked me off a little bit. I can remember that.
How old were you then?
Well, I was younger than, he wasn't home, my dad wasn't home yet. My dad came home in 46. I was born in 32. I was probably 12 or 13. I actually didn't have any friends or relatives that were killed or even injured. And I had lots of uncles in the service. And I had no friends. I know I had a neighbor, and it was an old couple, and they had the daughter living with them because her husband was in the war. And she would sit there and read to us the letters she got from her husband. But I'll never forget that. Anyway, and she gave me, I remember one time, chocolate milk with cubes in it, and I had never had anything like that before. Okay, so I didn't know anybody personally that had a death, which is unusual, but I didn't know that many people. So. And we had nobody injured. My dad had about 4 brothers or 5. They drafted the one brother, and he had club feet, which usually kept you out, but they took him. He was in the Army. Some of them were in the Navy. But I was lucky. We were lucky that there was no deaths or even injuries in our family. So, but my mother's brother guarded the China Wall for the U.S. Marines before the war ever started. I still can't believe we had people over there guarding the wall.
How many family members did you have that were in the war?
Well, my mother had 2 brothers. Oh, and her other brother was in the Normandy invasion. And he came out all right. Survived. came home. So there was 2 from her family, and my dad had a lot of brothers and brother-in-laws in the service. It'd take me a while to count them. Several.
Okay, and
Oh, we always had the star. Everybody had a star in their window. That was a big war thing. And a blue star and a silver and a gold. I think gold if they had passed. Blue, I don't know if there was there was 2 or 3. My mother and I went twice to visit her relatives in Colorado during this time. And we rode the Greyhound bus. My mother didn't drive. So we would get your schedule, and we would, the 2 of us would go to have to ride the city bus to the Greyhound bus station. And we'd go, and the bus would be full when it got to our town. We'd have to go home and wait for the next day. So we'd wait for the next day, go back down again. And the one time we had to stand up halfway to Denver, and the state of Kansas is very wide, so that was a lot of miles. We had to stand up in the aisle because there weren't any seats. And it was because, servicemen, there were servicemen, and then people didn't have cars because gasoline was rationed and tires were rationed. So a lot of people were riding the Greyhound at that time. And people were moving all the time and traveling. So, that was an experience. You know, we had the sales tax tickets, receipts, but I don't know if that had anything to do with the war, but in Kansas we had a little pad of green, I think they were, if you bought something and you paid sales tax, you got these receipts, and there was a little square piece of paper, and it had a 1 or 2 or 3, like the amount of pennies that you paid sales tax. And I don't know enough about it to explain it, but all I can remember is those little tablets of sales tax receipts. I'll have to ask somebody that knows more than I know about that. And having things rationed. Oh, the bicycle business was real big. My dad got into it before he was drafted. Just reconditioning any old used bike because everybody had to ride bicycles because there was no gasoline. And that's when he bought my used bike that I had till just a few years ago. Balloon-tired Schwinn, good bicycle. I should have kept it. That was one thing my dad was doing, and making money, of course, because I guess you could buy parts and recondition them, and still buy tires, I guess, for them. But car tires. Now from then, just anything being rationed, just like sugar. I mean, a woman now couldn't believe it. Sugar be rationed, coffee rationed, meat was rationed. I don't know what else. So, of course, the women were always fussing because they couldn't get their nylon hose, you know. Oh, that's when they started painting their legs to look like they had hose, and then they would put paint a stripe down the back because hose used to have a seam up the back. So they'd paint the stripe on the back of their legs to look like they had hose on. The base that was in my town, the Air Force base, had the big bombers, B-29 or B-19 or whatever, I'm not sure. Big base there. Of course, that was right in the middle of the United States, there in Kansas. And I know my dad this must have been before he left, he was hunting, and one of them crashed. He saw. And many years later, we were living in Springfield, Ohio, and my daughter was taking music lessons from a lady, and her son was stationed at that same base that was still there at that time in Topeka, Kansas, Forbes Air Force Base. And he happened to have been this was not during the war, I think. And they crashed and he was killed. In fact, I went to school with him, actually. So that was sad. My mother had to go to work. That was the first for her since she'd been married. She went to work. That was a change for me. So she worked in an insurance office, and some neighbor picked her up. So she hired a nanny to take care of me, which got to be kind of a joke, sort of, but she did cook and whatever. There was somebody in the house there when I got home from school. In grade school, and I was still in grade school, they didn't have any cafeterias, and my mother made an arrangement for me to go down the street to some lady who fixed my lunch for me, since my mother was off to work. And I don't know where the nanny was. I remember this lady would have pretty good meals at lunchtime. So there are all those things that, like, it changed our life because my mother went to work, and my father wasn't there. So, and my grandfather always lived on a farm. He didn't make too much living, but he tried. But when the war started, he got a job with the government building barracks. But he ended up in California and stayed in Pasadena. That's where he died. So that was a sure change for him.
So where was your dad at when D-Day happened?
He must have been on the boat. Although he did spend some time in Australia, so I can't tell you where he was exactly. He spent a little time in Hawaii, but I think he spent more time in Australia before they went on to Japan. I don't know, somewhere out there.
So what were his specific duties?
Radio control, something like that. That might not be right, but that's what comes to me. He was an optician all his life, and they thought whatever is the closest to what he did, civilian, they taught him to do there in Seattle. Lake Union was the name of it. And my daughter said that building has been pushed into the lake because it's not there anymore where he went to school. We always thought it was funny that they sent him clear to Farragut, Idaho, that doesn't have any big lakes much, being in the Navy. And colder because it was the middle of the winter. It had to be very cold. Although they tell me there's some places in Idaho that don't get so cold. So I guess the basic training for the Navy, it didn't matter where it was, I guess. Some people went to Chicago, though. We had neighbors that went at the same time. In fact, my neighbor, my girlfriend went to school with, her dad went about the same time, although he had 2 children. But he was drafted. And he was a fireman in civilian life, and so they made him a fireman, and he never went out of the United States. I was in a big hurricane in Hawaii in 1982, and the U.S. sent all of their big ships way out in the ocean, so they wouldn't get banged up in this hurricane. in the harbor. I remember that. 'Cause I couldn't figure out why they'd be any safer out there than in, but they said they were. And we thought we were going to die that night. It was so bad. Night before Thanksgiving. The wind was so bad and lights went out. We were up, I think, 19 floors up in a building. The windows were rattling. Couldn't use the elevators or anything. Couldn't walk down because we didn't have our flashlights. My dad lived to be 91, so he had a nice long life.
When did your mom die?
1970. She was 61.
What did she do during the war?
She's the one that worked in the insurance office. She was a stenographer. And that's what she did.
What did she do afterward?
We moved to Ohio. And she was pretty much lost because she never lived any place but Kansas. And but she would help take care of my kids whenever I needed her. And I would drop them off on the way to town. I probably took advantage of her. But that's the way it goes. Yeah, she did help sick people at one time. 2 or 3 neighbor ladies got cancer, and she helped take care of them. But she ended up with it also, and I still say that's catching. But nobody else says it.
What did she die from?
She had a lot of ailments. A lot. She'd had a thyroid operation when she was 21. And I'm sure she didn't take the proper medicine. You have to supposed to take insulin or something after you have that. She also had indigestion problems all her life. Plus the cancer. So she had a lot of things. A lot of things. She suffered a lot.
Would your dad tell you stories from the war?
Not a lot. He was a workaholic. He worked late hours. And his big thing was guns. He was an avid gun collector. And me being a girl, I wasn't interested in that. So, he had a couple of stories about when he kind of got almost caught selling those cigarettes, I think, in Japan. And but not too much to me. And if he did, I probably wasn't listening, which is probably what it amounted to. From the time he was in the service, I think I moved 10 times, at least. We moved to Ohio when he got out of the service. And then my husband and I moved to Canada, where his job took him. We lived in 2 houses in Canada. Then we moved back to Springfield, Ohio. That was another move. Oh, and we had 2 houses the first time in Springfield, and the second time in Springfield we had one house. Then we moved to Centerville, Ohio to be closer to his job. And then we had to move to Van Wert, Ohio because Frigidaire shut down their doors. And we lived in 2 houses in that town. And then I became a Hoosier. Been a Hoosier for 11 years.
So what's your favorite state to live in? What's your favorite place?
Well, I always thought it'd be nice to live near water, and that's what I'm doing. Although I don't like to get in it or on it, but I like to look at it. And in Kansas and Ohio, there wasn't any water. And yeah, and little hills are nice. Not a lot of hills. I don't like mountains, but just a little hills.
You're very particular.
Yeah. But right now we have too much snow. But I stay in, so I look out. I don't have to go out. I thought he brought back, I'm sure he brought back salt and pepper shakers because my mother had a very extensive collection, which just brought to mind that's where I got that collecting gene. Well, her salt and pepper shakers and my dad's guns, and his, well, I don't know that he went to very many auctions, but my uncle went to a lot of auctions, and I love auctions. So, so I guess I got the collecting from both sides. Anyway, I thought I'm sure he must have brought some from Japan, but I can't find them. And the ones that I thought were from Japan, when I finally looked at them close, they say Hawaii on them, so they're from. He picked them up in Hawaii. And I don't know if he got any guns to bring home or not. I'm sure if he could, he would have, because he always collected guns all his life.
What would you tell, especially a younger person who might wonder what it was like either to live during the war or right after it?
Well, the rationing, for one thing, you just can't imagine. These days, you can't imagine food being rationed.
What were the portion sizes?
Oh, I don't know. You got a 5-pound bag every so often. I don't know, once a month or whatever it was. I have no idea. I didn't cook, and you got so much meat a month, and you just, if you didn't go through that, you wouldn't believe it. The families that had lost loved ones, that was terrible. Some women would have 3 gold stars where they'd lost 3 sons in their window. It's terrible. And I just was lucky enough that I didn't have to experience that. And probably at my age, 11 to 13, that was probably kind of a bad time to not have a father, although we got through it. With the nanny looking over me.
Is that what a lot of kids had?
I don't know. Didn't know anybody that had a nanny, actually. This was an older church lady. Maybe she needed a place to stay. I don't know how she happened. I think my mother wanted somebody there for when I got home from school, I suppose. She was a good cook, too.
What did you think when you heard the war was over?
I don't know. I suppose it was big news, I'm sure. I mean, that's about as good as you can get it at that time. That's what everybody wanted. Yeah, I wasn't too much of an age to somehow get involved, except that my dad wasn't there. You know, I suppose I felt like then my dad would be coming home after that. But I'm sure there was a lot of wives that liked to hear the news. Mothers of servicemen. And then I ended up with my children were not of the age to be in any wars, my boys, which is a miracle. But my husband was drafted.
What war was he in?
That would be, I think, the Korean War, 1950. But he didn't go to war. He went to Germany in occupation forces, actually, in Germany. So he didn't have any danger.
What did he do there?
He repaired the big trucks, and he taught New York City boys how to drive who had never driven a car. But he was basically, I think, in a garage where they were repairing, and I know he had to drive these huge big trucks of some kind. They would have, I don't know what they called it, where they had some kind of, they go out, where they go out and practice. Drills, yeah. But they also would drive to another city for parades or something in Germany. And they'd have these big cars, trucks, and stuff. So, and he calls it his vacation. He was there on 6 months, and it was his German vacation, and he enjoyed it. Took advantage of it. Did sightseeing in Munich, all around. So he lucked out, basically, except the basic training was terrible in cold weather in Kentucky. It's bad. They put him in charge of the boilers to keep the place warm. But they'd have to go out and march and all, and your shoes and boots didn't fit right, and get blisters and all that. All his buddies that we sent Christmas cards to for all these years, all over the United States, are all dead. And there's only one widow left that I still write to in New Jersey. She's had the same address from before the war, which was 1950. So she's lived in the same house forever. And it must be a double or something, because it's got a 1/2 after the number, the street in New Jersey. I should have listened more, I guess. I wasn't a history buff, for one thing. Never was. And so I just went along trying to make it through school.
Got it.
Yep.
Well, anything else you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything. Anything we missed? I don't know.